Hi there, and welcome to week two. Hope week one went okay for you. Hopefully, you got some good, valuable information that will be useful in your day-to-day lives and jobs. Um, as we go into week two, we're going to get into a little bit more depth into individual pieces of government finance and budgeting in particular. Week two, we're going to look primarily at revenues, which is great for a government, for us as individual taxpayers. Maybe not our favorite topic, because usually that means talking about taxes. Um, you know, uh, Revenues are very important thing to talk about for governments, and there's a lot that goes into it. There's a really delicate balance into how governments structure their different revenue streams. The Bob Bland article that you'll read here in week two is going to give you a real high level overview of what goes into governments deciding what kinds of taxation they want to impose. Um, there's all sorts of equity concerns. There's concerns over how do you collect them, how do you make sure that people are not shirking it, and that it's not causing more headache than it's worth. Um, and then there's sometimes those things are at odds with each other, and so there's this really weird balancing act that's always at play. And to that effect, once we go over revenues at a real high level, we're going to go over something that's called tax expenditure limitations. And this is a really interesting, rich area, and I've provided several sources for you to look at if you have time and you really like this sort of thing. But these are ways that residents or citizens have put limitations on government's taxation authority. Just about every state has one of these or several of these. If you look at the Park and Mar reference from 2018 under the discussion for week two, you'll see some of those different state limitations. Um, Colorado, as it turns out, has the tightest limitations on taxation per that Park et al. Article. California is also right up there with Proposition 13. Colorado, we have Tabor, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and then many other states have different versions of it. A lot of times, at least in California and in Colorado, those tax and expenditure limitations are on property tax. Um, Nothing gets people's goat here in Colorado like property taxes, sales tax. Eh. But there's a lot that goes into it, and you'll see it more in the reading. But we'll learn about how people react to taxes. Not a big mystery; they don't like them. The Martell and Teskey article; those are two folks here in Colorado talk about some different elements of Tabor. I do want to note for folks that in November of 2020, something called the Gallagher Amendment, a tax expenditure limitation, that was repealed in 2020. And so that took some pressure off of taxation in Colorado. It's a really long, complicated thing to explain, and we won't go into it here. But as you're reading in that Martell article, you'll see Gallagher referenced. Um, so that's tax expenditure limitations, not to be confused with tax expenditures, which, to be honest, I've never heard incentives, which is what they are called tax expenditures in real life. That's maybe more academic, maybe in other places they call it that, but a lot of times tax expenditures are taxes generated and then given back to like a developer or given to a particular cause um, that's deemed of worth to the community, something that the community really wants to see. Um, a lot of times that's going to be incentives back to developers in exchange for them building something really big and cool that's going to serve people. The government refunds some of the tax revenue to pay for stuff like roads and pipes and drainage and other infrastructure stuff, usually, not always. Um, and so there's a lot of incentives like that in Colorado. We have it here at the state level. A lot of cities do it and counties do it as well. Um, and this is important because a lot of times that's how development gets done, especially in big cities. Governments will work hand in hand with developers and kind of kick back some of that tax revenue to them in exchange for a cool development. So we are going to look at that. Our second assignment for the week is all about tax increment financing, which is a pretty common tax expenditure. Um, and you'll read more about it in the assignment. So we will also go over accounting, just real generally and real high level. I'm a budget guy. Accounting's not really my strong suit, but you have to know enough to be dangerous no matter what you're doing. We're going to talk about fund accounting in particular. And when you think about different funds within a government, think about your checking account, your general fund if you're a government, versus your various savings account. Maybe those will be your special revenue funds, um, or other things like that. And then you'll learn about things called enterprise funds, which is when a government has a arm of itself that works like a private business. It brings in money, it spends that same money, it kind of stands on its own. And then you'll learn about fiduciary funds, agency funds, and trust funds and stuff like that. Um, it's all really important, not super exciting, but kind of nuts and bolts sort of stuff. So we'll talk about that. The first assignment for the week that comes straight out of the textbook is just to help you kind of understand the different types of funds that governments might have and how super basic fund accounting works. Um, the assignments themselves, they are both spreadsheet based. I don't know how many of you like spreadsheets, but this is really, really super simple spreadsheet stuff. You will do just fine. I have every confidence in you. And so the assignment for the assignment number one, the instructions look a little daunting, but once you get into them, they're really not all that. They're actually pretty straightforward. And maybe if you're that kind of person, you might even have a little bit of fun with it. I did when I first did it. I'm weird, but hopefully you're weird too, and you'll have some fun with it. Um, but this is like real world, tangible stuff that we're going over here. So hopefully that's worth something for you. Um, for the second assignment, the TIF assignment, please, please, please pay very special attention to each of the instructions, and pay extra special attention to the decimal places when you're calculating your TIF amounts. Doing your spreadsheet, the decimal places when looking at the mill levy, that's of critical importance. A lot of my students over the years have overlooked that, so uh, check it a couple of times before you submit it. Going into the spiritual side of things, we're going to look at leadership during difficult times. That's absolutely part of stewardship, as no doubt all of us know by this point in our lives. We're going to look through the lens of a couple of folks in Scripture, one of them being Joseph in the Old Testament, and how the dude was just super pragmatic, tough as nails, when he was looking ahead to the famine that would be coming to Egypt after the 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And it served Egypt very well, served Joseph very well. Um, and so that showed true leadership. We're also going to look at the words of Jesus himself, as we look at taxation, maybe not so much leadership, but what does Scripture say about taxation? Um, we like it or not, it actually says the fair amount. There's the reference to, I think it's Mark 12, where Jesus is handed a denarius by the scribes and Pharisees, and he says, "Pay to Caesar what's Caesar's, pay to God what's God's." And they're like, "Wow, that didn't see that coming." And so there is that kind of like, we need to comply with taxes. And he said that just a few short years after there was a tax revolt by the Jews there in Israel against the Roman government. Um, and there's also Romans 13, the first few verses in Romans 13, which talk about the role of government, the role of all of us to submit to government, and what does that look like? Why is that important? And so it's not such a simple thing. Our relationships with government. If we work in government, it's even more complex. But it's all there in Scripture, and I encourage you to think through that as we read through it, not just breeze through it. But what does that look like for us in our lives, especially in the midst of COVID and mandates and all these other things? I'm not saying I know the answer or have a right answer, but certainly worth spending some time thinking on, praying through. So um, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoy it. I'm enjoying the class so far. Thank you for sharing about yourselves with me. I look forward to continuing in our journey together. Have a great week.